We still have a few more funneling in. We're going to get started momentarily here. Thank you for your patience. Wow, great group today. Great attendance. Thank you for joining. We'll get started in just a moment. Okay, we're at 3 after, and we're still adding folks, but I think we'll jump in. Welcome to this webinar. We are so excited to be here today with you, talking about operational resilience, lessons learned, and key strategies for success. Just a couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. It will be added to the BCI library website, which you can find in the resources tab to the webinar today. Also in that tab is the PDF version of this presentation. You're welcome to download that. There's also a link to the Archer website that has more collateral, more information about what we're talking about today. We encourage you to ask questions and engage in the conversation. You can do that through using the Q&A panel you'll see there on your webinar. And if you're experiencing any problems today with the webinar, it typically gets resolved by restarting the browser. So with that, let's jump in. We're going to introduce ourselves. So this is Patrick Potter. I'm speaking. I am with the product marketing organization of Archer. I've been with Archer about 12 years, but prior to Archer, I spent about 25 years with various companies and as a consultant in leading risk management, business continuity and resiliency, compliance, Sarbanes-Oxley, compliance, Sarbanes-Oxley, process improvement, and a number of different related initiatives to governance, risk and compliance, and risk and resilience. It's really good to be with you today. Luciano, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Luciano Veronese. I'm based in Italy, and I'm a principal sales engineer at Archer, and which means I support the Archer business across EMEA from the pre-sales perspective. And I have been with Archer for the past 14 years and touching all the typical GRC integrated risk management domain. Okay. So perfect. Yeah, so let's get started and start with the first polling question. So what is your organization currently, the current level of commitment, planning, and execution in building operational resilience? So we'll give you a couple of minutes or so to vote.
Yeah, I think the responses, Luciano, we're starting out, we're taking steps, or it's a high priority. The results are almost divided in thirds so far. We're getting some good response. I'll share that just as soon as everyone's had a chance. Okay, 100% have answered. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Can you see that? Luciano, what do you think? It's almost split pretty evenly between the two, a little bit less on third.
Yeah, more or less, yes. That's good.
Yeah, good to know it's a priority for everyone at this point. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing. Let's jump in. Thanks, Luciano, for posting that polling question. We've got a couple more. So really, we want to talk about three things today. One, lessons learned. Two, some trends that we're seeing that are coming out of companies pivoting from traditional business recovery to building resilience, operational resilience. And then third, Luciano is going to take us through some very interesting and timely and important regulatory changes that are occurring that we want you to know about. So first, we're going to talk about the lessons learned. And Luciano is going to be monitoring the Q&A. So if questions come up, on a topic we're talking about, we're going to take those right as we're speaking about the topic.
Yeah, there's already one, by the way, about the definition of operational resilience. I've responded directly, but we'll provide the definitions over the next slides. So yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, I think we will. I mean, just to quickly touch on that, operational resilience really is building the ability to adapt and adjust on the fly proactively, as opposed to relying completely and wholly on recovery. So it's really not just about what the traditional business resiliency on the left there, for example, or business continuity teams have done, but it's really evolving to the right. So thinking about your entire ecosystem, thinking about from your products and services you offer to customers, all the way through the dependencies, across your risk domains in your organization, being proactive, really developing resilience measures into the way the company does business, the organization does business. And it's extending not just across your organization, but across your supply chain, your third-party ecosystem, what you want to call it. I'd say another big difference is in the metrics around this, because traditional metrics are based on recovery or mean time to recover, mean time to or recovery time objective, but now operational resilience has brought in more business impact tolerance. So how much of a disruption can we tolerate in terms of revenue loss or impact to our people or our business, things like that. And then I think testing is much more, well, let me back up even. I think risk management is taking a much more prevalent place in operational resilience than it has in business continuity, business recovery. And then that leads into testing, not just recovery plan testing, but testing our ability to manage risks and threats and other resilience measures that we've put into the company. It's really building resilience into the fabric of the company, as opposed to kind of your traditional small business continuity team driving recovery plans throughout the company. This has been occurring. I think it's been evolving for a number of years, but it's really come to the forefront with some regulations that I'm sure you're all familiar with. Luciano's going to talk about a little bit later. One of the lessons learned, I think that we've seen is organizations are making progress. We did a survey of about 300 of our customers, and we saw that 12% are planning, kind of like the survey you just took, and the results aren't too far off from how you guys answered. 68% were actively taking steps, and 76% felt like it was a priority, not just at the grassroots level, but at the executive level. The second lesson is, we don't feel like most companies are in the dark about doing this, about building operational resilience. We feel like most, at least those that have had business continuity programs, teams, IT disaster recovery teams, are pretty well positioned to lead out on this, because they've got trained professionals. They know what they're doing. They're certified in many cases. These organizations have continuity or recovery programs, and they're in a position, if they're not already, to monitor, to measure, to evaluate their status, right? So in traditional terms, we may track the number of business processes that have had business impact analyses performed on them, or we may track the number of business processes that have, or however you do it, business units, however you do it, locations that have business continuity plans. That ability to track and report on those, as well as the issues and findings that come up, is absolutely vital to building operational resilience. We are seeing a little more attention at the top, which I'll talk about in just a second. But we're finding that companies are pretty well positioned to do this. The next thing I'll say is that this is a journey, it really is, building operational resilience. And I think business continuity was kind of have that circular motion too. But, just the fundamentals of building operational resilience. On the left, they're identifying your important business services, what's most important that you provide to your end customers, and what are the dependencies within your organization that allow you to provide those, like your people, your systems, technologies, business processes, locations, etc. Setting the impact tolerances, how much of a disruption can we tolerate, is expressed by metrics, especially financial metrics. Identifying risks, threats, risk scenarios, so combinations of risks that can impact the organization, analyzing those, putting in place mitigation and resiliency measures, and then testing, and then self-assessing, and then doing that, I say annually here, but it could be more often, just depends on the criticality of that important business service or process and the dependencies. But it's really a loop of improvement and priority based on the criticality. So this is a journey. That's the way to look at this. The fourth lesson is, Luciano, like I said, we'll talk about some of the regulations later. And those in the UK, for example, are very focused on financial services. But we're finding that building a resilient organization, a resilient company, a business model, benefits all organizations, whether you're required by regulations or not. And here's just a few examples. In the US, Gap and New Balance and MasterCard, Visa, you can see examples. I won't read through these, but this is resulting in operational efficiencies, in money saved, less dependence on third parties in terms of single points of failure or concentration risk. And I love the last example. MasterCard and Visa said, you know what, our world is changing, and if we can't beat them, we're going to join them. And they jumped into the Apple Pay and the Google Wallet market and trend. So, but building resilience means a lot of different things, not just reacting and recovering, but like I said, really building resilient measures into the way you do business. If any of you have ever been involved in Six Sigma, this will resonate with you, because that's a function or a program where you look at the way the business is run from top to bottom and identify ways to make it more efficient, more effective. Very similar. And I've got some Six Sigma background, so that's why it resonates with me. All right, we've got another polling question. Let's jump into it. I will launch that right now. Give me 1 second. Okay, you should see the question now. And it is, what is your organization's biggest challenge in building operational resilience? Could be a lack of executive support and leadership. Could be we just don't know how resilient we are. So we don't have that reporting, or we don't have budget to do this. We don't have the risk management discipline to build on top, or it could be that we just have other things going on. So take a minute to respond there. Great, thank you for doing that. We'll share those results. Okay, 100% answered. I'm going to share the results now. So it looks like number one is other priorities. Boy, we are all super busy, aren't we, with other things? I mean, we've got businesses to run, don't we? The next is we just don't know how resilient we are, which is great. I'm not glad that bubbled up to the top, but I'm glad it's something we can address. And we'll later, when we talk a little bit about Archer, we're gonna show you how. And then budget, risk management, executive leadership, and support. Great, thank you for sharing. So now we're going to jump into a look ahead, and what I mean by this is some trends that we've been seeing that are kind of bubbling up from organizations that are trying to implement a more resilient business or operational resilience as a discipline. And the first one I mentioned here is risk management really is taking on added importance for operational resilience. And you see this, not just, it doesn't just make good sense, because it does, but you see this in the regulations too. Luciano is going to talk about, especially, CPS 230 in Australia, and DORA, which he's going to spend a lot of time on today. But really, what this says to us is that, I guess, instead of the business continuity team being the team that does the risk analysis, which isn't a bad thing, but what this means is we need to look at risk management as a foundation across the resilience approach, or the resilience program. Meaning, if you look at those siloed, I call them siloed risk functions there at the bottom. For a business or an organization to be successful in implementing operational resilience, there has to be alignment across those risk functions. So the BCM team, the enterprise operational risk team, audit, even compliance, third-party risk, all these groups that are evaluating risk, doing risk management, have to line up. They've got to have some common goals, priorities. They have to be working off the same risk appetite, risk register, looking at risk in the same way. That's what I mean about it. One, it's taking on added importance, but that has got to drive some process improvement around risk management. That's a real theme and undertone of operational resilience. One of the reasons is risks are so interrelated. You look at the ones here, and I'm sure you can relate. And many of these have a domino effect, right? The geopolitical impacts on labor, the supply chain. We've seen that the last few years. We saw the pandemic and the impacts on labor. So back to the risk assessment or risk management. Looking at risks and threats as an individual risk is good. You've got to do that and evaluate those relative to your risk appetite, but you've got to look at risks in relation to each other. And that's why a few slides back, when I talked about the circular process of operational resilience, you've got to look at these scenarios. So what's a scenario that can impact your organization? What are the risks that are part of that scenario, and how are you managing those? So they're a really important reason to have risk management really tied up. And the risk landscape is changing too. I mean, I'm sure you see that in your organizations. And I mean, just thinking about how organizations came out of the pandemic, we saw just a real acceleration of risk leaders taking on more risk, that even board of directors approving increases in risk appetite for the company and risk thresholds, really trying to make up time and money that was lost during those couple of years. So not sure what you're seeing in your organization, but we've seen a definite increase in risk tolerance. Another trend, and this is good for those that responded to the last survey saying this was an issue, but we're seeing more and more executives taking the lead, this coming from the board or this coming from the C-suite. And we're finding that this really is a necessary trend. You've got cultures and companies where some are a bottoms up and some are a top down. And we just feel like this has got to be something that is driven really from both ends. But if you don't have the executive buy-in and sponsorship and championship on this, it's going to run into roadblocks, because you've got to drive a new culture. There's got to be some accountability, and the board has got to make those executives accountable as well. Another trend that we've seen, I love this study. This is one that McKinsey did a few years back. So they tracked back in the financial crisis of 2007 and 9. They identified about 1,200 companies that they termed resilience, and you see how I spell it over there on the left. So resilient companies, they had prepared through financial means and other measures to be determined as resilient by McKinsey. They tracked their performance though through the economic downturn and after it for about 10 years. And you can see the trend. They evaluated them against non-resilient companies, and then the S&P 500, and they outperformed by 150% those that were non-resilient. So the message here is that this is a discipline that not only helps you recover from or even prepare for disruption, but it makes you a better business. If you think of it holistically and you think of it as how do we build a better business, a more resilient business that adapts to what's going to come, and not just disruption, but competition, changes in your business model, your industry, your country, your region. Not everything is, we call a disruption at this point, but it's thinking about out of the box a little bit about those events that could affect your resilience. Benefits of resilience. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but I think it allows you to anticipate change better when you've built that agility into the business. When you are disrupted, you can recover a lot more quickly. And similar to the McKinsey study, the outcomes kind of speak for themselves. So you can spend a little more time on this slide in the deck if you download that. A fourth trend we're seeing is that third-party resilience is absolutely vital. We've seen how geopolitical issues, pandemics, national disasters don't just disrupt our companies, but your global supply chains. I'll just kind of click through these statistics here and just touch on a couple of points because I want to wrap things up here in a sec. But think about the expanse of your supply chain or your third-party ecosystem, and you've got third parties, fourth, fifth, sixth, nth parties. That's a big part of your business, an extension of your business to get your arms around, and those have expanded. They're not getting smaller, and they're getting more complex. So it's absolutely vital that the resilience of your third parties that support especially your important business services through that dependency chain be as resilient as you are if you rely on them to that extent. So this is another trend that we're seeing that's absolutely critical in building operational resilience.
Patrick, sorry to interrupt. There is an interesting question. How are you defining resilient? What determines whether an organization is a resilient or non-resilient organization?
Yeah, great question. I think it really is determined by you. So back to, for example, those impact tolerances and your risk appetite. It's all about the measurement. So part of building resilience is defining what are the key measures that we need to track and evaluate that will determine if we are where we should be, if we're resilient enough. One of those is your impact tolerances by those important business services. Another is your risk tolerance and your risk appetite. Others might be, back to the good old recovery time objective, recovery point objective for your data. If you look at some of the Big Four's methodologies when they work with companies, one, I forget which one it is, but define pillars. So business operations is a pillar. People is a pillar. IT, cyber, maybe there's a couple more. They do
supplier facilities.
Yes, yes, exactly. So they will recommend that you define measures by those pillars. So it's a great question. It's an interesting question. There's no easy answer. It's really driven by you, by your business. But those are some examples of some metrics that you need to track and evaluate, and then roll that up. If you want to, and it's kind of a tricky metric to say we are resilient enough or we are not. But it's kind of like driving a car. You look at a lot of different things as you're driving, and you're kind of a good way to look at it. Hopefully that answers the question. Happy to talk more about it too later if you'd like. Yeah, just a couple quick things on third party. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but here's some ways that you can start to really, get together on resilience across your supply chain. Just a couple more slides. This is an interesting one, a trend that has started to bubble up. So we work with a lot of companies helping them develop their ESG capabilities. And we're seeing some real intersections between, for example, sustainability and resilience. And, seeing some regulatory scrutiny around this as well. I'm wondering if the regulators at some point may dovetail this with some of the resilience regulations. And then there's definite financial and reputational risk, which you also get as part of, these are risks you look at as part of your resilience stable of risks too. All right, Luciano, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you and have you take us through some of these slides. I will let you share your screen now.
Yes. Okay. Can you see the slides?
Yes, thank you. Perfect.
So, okay, let's see how Archer can help. And I noticed that earlier you also pointed out the issue of measuring resilience. So I will talk about that stuff as well. So how Archer can help. So very quickly, as Patrick pointed out earlier, the very first thing to consider is that any business resilience initiative should be framed in the context of a broader integrated risk management initiative for us. Why is this so? Reason is that building operational resilience in a team is actually a team play that requires different teams working together with a common governance structure, common goals, processes, and technologies so that they can drive the organization towards those objectives. So the important thing is that you cannot implement resilience in isolation as if it was in an organizational silo. It simply doesn't work. Okay, so integrated risk management is absolutely key. By integrated risk management, we mean a set of control functions like the ones that are described. So what is Archer? Archer is a suite of integrated solutions to support any integrated risk management initiative. By default, the solution areas that we cover are typically about the typical GRC integrated risk management domains in any organization. So they are the common components like compliance, operational risk, etc. And you see that we have also the resiliency management. These solutions are built on top of a common platform that we call Archer Platform. This is absolutely key because these solutions out of the box deliver value based on standard best practices that have been developed across the world. However, each organization is different. So in order to consider the differences across the organization, it's absolutely paramount to be able to align the solutions to the specific business needs. And the Archer platform allows you to do this through a configuration effort only, so with a zero code approach. So the time to, let's say, delivery is actually very, very fast. Typically, on average, it takes about 3-4 months to deliver a solution. The key point is that each of these solutions can be broken down into a series of smaller functional modules that we call Archer use cases. As you see, there are a lot of modules, and the benefit of these use cases is that you can adopt a progressive approach in delivering the solution, and you can start even from just one single module. In addition to the Archer ecosystem, we also have an extended offerings that's called Archer Exchange, which includes a series of other interesting offerings, for example, content, especially in the regulatory space, but also integrations with other systems. So, for example, in the case of DORA, with vulnerability management systems, penetration testing systems, or things like that. Now, as Patrick pointed out earlier, there are several regulations today that deal with operational resilience, and the most important ones are these 3 regulations. Number one is the UK regulation that was issued by the PRA Bank of England. It was, yes, in the space of financial services, but actually this regulation is rather generic. And the other is the European Union DORA regulation, and the most recently released regulation is the CPS 230 in Australia. What is interesting about these regulations is the definition of resilience. Here I have summarized the different definitions of the concept of resilience. And interesting to note that in the UK regulation, it's defined as the ability of the organization to recover from operational disruptions that impact the ability of the organization to deliver its obligations to customers. So it's very generic, a generic concept, although it has been created in the context of financial services. From the other side, the focus of DORA is more on the, as you can see, operational integrity from a technology perspective. So first of all, I mean, the target audience, let's say, is more about financial institutions, banking, insurance company, things like that. And the focus is on the delivery of digital services. Okay, so it's more restricted from this perspective, but broader in terms of required capabilities. The Australian regulation is something in between because they talk about, again, ICT systems, but also talk about generically about disruptive events. So it's something in between. Now, how can we address with Archer the UK regulation, regulatory requirements? So if you remember the previous slide, there is one dedicated use case that's called operational scenario analysis in the area of the resilience, business resiliency. Now, this regulation was issued, if I remember well, 2-3 years ago. And so when we started developing our module to support operational resiliency, we actually got inspiration from this specific regulation. So the current use case, the functional module that you have was built around this regulation. And what it does is exactly the same flow that Patrick shared with you earlier. So according to this regulation, the goal is on the disrupting event. So first of all, we needed to be able to identify the important services in the organization. And to identify the important services, we'll need to go through a BIA, business impact analysis process that has been, of course, extended in comparison with a typical process that's used in the context of business continuity. And then we need to understand what are the dependencies. So given the service that we have identified to be critical, what are the assets that are related with that service? After that, of course, if we want to identify when something is disruptive, we can define and we can identify disrupting event by setting impact tolerances. So to what extent we accept that a failure is disrupting or not. And these tolerances can be defined using different unit of measures. They could be about money that we're losing. They could be about customers that we're losing or about time that's above a given threshold. After I have identified the tolerances, I can define the scenarios. So Archer provides all the functionalities to allow you to connect the dots. So to define the scenario, to define the risk, the threats, the assets associated. Of course, the real testing will happen offline outside of Archer, but Archer allows you to keep track of everything. And eventually we'll have an outcome. The scenario will be failed or not. And we can also identify where in the, for example, mapped assets are the points of failure. So this aspect, the capability to define scenarios and measure the outcome of the scenario, mean that actually we can measure resiliency using numbers. The most simple approach is to count the number of failed scenarios against the overall number of scenarios. But in our solution, we also capture other data points regarding, for example, third parties or the failed applications, the failed processes. So we have a very granular view that allows us to measure rather accurately the overall level of resilience. And then eventually, of course, we need to take action, and then it's a loop as Patrick pointed out. Okay, so we have out of the box a use case that was built on top of the UK regulation. And what about DORA? DORA is indeed a very complex regulation. We could say that the main objective of DORA is to strengthen the operational resiliency related to digital services for financial institutions. So Yes, it's again financial institutions, but the focus is highly on digital services. And we do this by enabling an organization with the capability to identify and recover from disruption. So DORA, I think you are all aware that DORA includes 5 pillars. So the requirements that are described in the regulation can be broken down to 5 pillars that are about ICT risk management, incident management, management of ICT third-party risk. There is one area dedicated to the digital operational resilience testing. So here is a focus on testing of digital resilience, and information sharing is another one. I will not go through these requirements. Of course, the regulation is very complex. Just let me clarify a couple of points. In the area of ICT risk management, what it means is that the goal is to maintain a resilient ICT system. We'll see what it means in a second. This area also includes a series of requirements regarding business continuity. So this is the place where business continuity fits into the bigger picture. The goal is, again, to maintain a resilient ICT systems. And of course, we also want to monitor ICT risks that could impact the capability of organization to deliver the digital services. Regarding the digital operational resilient testing area, the goal, the core of this requirement is about making sure that the elements involved in the delivery of the critical digital services should be periodically tested for preparedness. So the focus of the regulation in this case is on testing systems that are mapped into the delivery of the critical services. So in this case, we needed to identify upfront any weakness, deficiency, in order to fix those deficiencies. Okay, so this is just to highlight a couple of points. Now we might wonder, okay, the focus of DORA is to strengthen resilience, but how do these requirements, how can these requirements actually allow an organization to strengthen resilience? And how all the different 5 pillars, requirements grouped into the 5 pillars fit together into a coherent picture. And let me start from the definition. This is a very generic definition. As you can see, there is no one single definition of resilience, but this is the one that is rather generic and generally accepted. So that's the ability of the organization to prevent, adapt, respond to, recover, and learn from operational disruptions. In this case, an operational disruption, of course, is related to the capability of organization to deliver their services or products, digital services and digital products, by continuing to achieve these objectives. So the focus is on operational disruptions. So what do we mean by operational disruption? So how can we achieve resilience? How can we strengthen resilience? Well, we could say that a service disruption is, again, the inability to meet specific obligations. So each financial organization has specific obligations against their users, the customers, to deliver specific products and services. However, due to some reasons, causes, threats, something bad that happens, that occur in specific conditions, specific assets, or get specific outcomes, they could be disrupted. Okay, so basically, this is the definition of a scenario. The concept of scenario is very generic, and you can find the same concept across multiple disciplines. But we could describe the scenario more or less as follows. First of all, we needed to have something bad that happens. So this is what is called disrupting event or simply threat. And this threat wants to target a specific assets in order to impact the delivery, in this case, of digital services. So what is affected? And if you wanted to understand whether or not the overall delivery, the capability of the organization to deliver the digital service is impacted, we define a disruption criteria, which is typically defined in terms of threshold that should be checked. It could be about money, it could be about time, it could be about any metrics you like. But as Patrick pointed out, you can define your metrics as well. And eventually we have an outcome. So we identify a scenario that defines the set of all of this stuff. And eventually, after we test the scenario, we will have an outcome, the scenario result, which is in general a failed scenario, a partially failed scenario, or a fully executed scenario, no fail scenario. Okay, so this is the definition of this scenario. So we can say that if we wanted to strengthen resilience, we can strengthen resilience by identifying these scenarios, and so the threats that have the capability to trigger those scenarios. And then the scenario also defines the conditions and the outcome, of course. And so we identify the systems that should be tested in order to make sure that that scenario will not fail if that event happens. So these concepts are very well known in the ICT space in general. Here there is an important point. When we consider the amount, the set of threats that will be considered in this space, it's actually very, very large. Yes, we're talking about digital services, so we might think that the threats are only related with cyber-related threats. That is not the case. And even in the DORA regulation, they say that actually the threats could be of other types, regulatory types, ESG types, things like that. So there are also multiple types of threats. So in general, it's not possible to test all the possible scenarios. I needed to filter them out. So basically, I needed to prioritize the different scenarios. And of course, the prioritization should be business-driven. By business-driven prioritization, I mean that we should consider only the threats that affects the delivery of the critical digital services or the digital products. Okay, so that's an important concept we'll see in a second. So we can put together all this stuff together through a conceptual model. This conceptual model is not an architecture. It's a way to put the DORA requirements together to see how they work together, but at the same time, since you may remember the initial picture that describes the different use cases of Archer, this is actually also corresponds to how the different use cases of Archer could work together, because we'll see the mapping that Archer has a very good coverage in covering all these use cases, all these components, DORA requirements. So the very first thing, again, is to map the business context. By business context, I mean the set of assets and their relationships. So I needed to be able to document the product and services, the processes that support those services, the applications that support those processes, the devices, facilities, and so on. And also the third parties. That's very important, especially for resilience. That's one of the key differences against any business continuity or disaster recovery initiative. And then, since we want to focus on the critical digital services, we need to go through a BIA, business impact analysis process. Of course, this is not the standard BIA process that we use in the BCDR world. It must be a different process targeting products and services. And then the outcome is a set of critical assets. Now, the next step is to identify the threats. So this is what is often called early threat detection or situational awareness. And in general, we can break down the set of threats into two groups, as usual. We have external threats and internal threats. But if you think about a threat can be thought as a change in the risk profile. I'm saying this because I want to link the verbiage with the DORA verbiage, meaning that they talk about risk management, ICT risk management, or third-party risk management. So if you think of external threat intelligence, a change in the third-party risk profile, meaning something bad that happens in one of third parties in our supply chain, is actually a potential threat that could jeopardize our capability to deliver digital services. But there are others, for example, regulation. There is a change in the regulation space that we need to mandate with, or ESG. The flooding of a data center might be a threat for the delivery of critical digital services and so on. And the same is true for the internal threat intelligence. So the ICT risk, a change of the risk profile in ICT risk, actually becomes a threat that could impact our ability to deliver digital services. So we have the threats, we have the critical assets from the other side. We can merge them together to identify the disruptive events. So this merge operation, that's basically a correlation. That's actually very simple, that because we have all the building blocks in place, we have the documentation of the third parties, of their risks, their relationships with the critical services. So by using reporting, we can filter out and identify what are the disruptive threat events. And the disruptive threat events are the triggers for scenarios. So this means that I can identify the scenarios, thanks with the relationship with the assets, the scenarios to test. And as I said at the beginning, we can also do a resilience testing, because given the outcome of the scenario and the reason a scenario failed, I can collect a series of data points that allows me to rate the resilience. And this is key, is extremely important. This is not explicitly written, to my knowledge, in the DORA regulation. However, it is fairly obvious, as any other process, that if we put in place a resilience initiative, we may want to measure our progress over time. So using this approach, it is possible to rank the resilience and understand whether or not our initiatives are improving, enhancing, or worsening our resilience. If a scenario fails, of course, I need to go through a change management effort, means I need to take action. This might imply the strengthening the control environment, changing the strategy, changing our BCDR plan, things like that. And then, of course, it is a loop and we need to continue. And where does the incident management fit? This is a good place, because incidents are interesting, because incidents might be related to a scenario I have already documented and tracked. In that case, I could link the incident with a scenario for future reference and testing. If the incident cannot be linked with an existing scenario, it's even more interesting, because the incident is about a threat I didn't think about earlier. And so I will add it to my threat library, and I will create a scenario to test that possible incident. This is just like with operational risks. And finally, there is the communication and sharing, which is about sharing about incidents or information about the plans, also threats, things like that. There are also a lot of other requirements in the DORA regulation that that are basically cross-cutting. They are related with governance, policy management, audit, and reporting, and other stuff. This conceptual model is actually a simplified version of the conceptual model. This is a more complicated than the initial version that I built. That's the same thing. I just wanted to highlight the light blue boxes with other functions that we can actually support in Archer. For example, we can support the generic threat intelligence process. We can collect from end users possible events that might be possible threats to consider. We can inject from external service provider regulatory intelligence feeds, or we can interface with the CM systems, penetration testing system, vulnerability management, like vulnerability management systems, and so on. So it's much more complicated. And of course, in the documentation of, there are also some DORA-specific elements. Some of them are already available. For example, vulnerability management are already available out of the box in Archer. Others could be simply added through configuration. So the mapping. So we have seen the DORA requirement, the 5 DORA pillars. We have seen the overall set of use cases. We can map the Archer use cases across the set of 5 pillars. And this is the mapping. So in the risk management area, we have a series of use cases. Of course, I'm not going into the details, but just for you to know that we can support any ICT risk management functionality, control assurance in terms of control testing, vulnerability management, SMS, a series of functions, including BCDR planning. Here we see also insight risk modification, more on the last slide. Here we have also incident reporting, cyber incident breach response. So we support an incident response process and breach management. For the digital operational resilience testing, BIA modified to test the product and services, and also operational scenario analysis that although it has been created for the UK regulation, it can be recycled also for the DORA. Third party, we have a comprehensive set of use cases to support any generic third-party risk management process, but also a one dedicated to IT security. And eventually, for information sharing, we have something specific about regulatory management and other stuff. The light yellow boxes are more functionalities inside use cases. And finally, we have other use cases, again, that address the cross-cutting requirement. Okay, so I would say that we have a very good coverage across the entire set of DORA pillars. The last two slides. I just wanted to show you a practical example, okay? The example is very simple. We would like to define a scenario, so to test the assets associated with the scenarios related to high severity vulnerabilities associated with business critical services. How can we do that? Well, the first thing, as we said, we need to map the business context. So we can track the relation, all the products, services, processes, application, devices, facilities, and their relationships. Okay, so it's something very easy to do in Archer. We can also document the third parties. This is absolutely important because they are part of the capability of the organization to deliver the digital services. And then we can do a BIA, targeting either product and services or business processes. And eventually, I can understand, okay, if a product is critical, and if that's critical, the critical information can cascade down across the chain. So I can identify the critical devices, and they're critical because they support the critical business services. And I can do the same for other parties, identifying the critical service providers. After I do this, thanks to the IT security vulnerability management use case, I can manage the ingestion of the vulnerabilities from the scanning systems, so I can filter out the high severity vulnerabilities that are mapped into critical devices. That's a very simple correlation. After I've done this, thanks to the operational resilience use case, I can build a scenario targeting the critical service, I can define tolerances, and I can collect all the information to measure resilience, but I can also add some DORA-specific elements regarding the systems associated with product and services in order to keep track of the tests that I've done over those systems, okay? So this is a very simple scenario, very generic one, but I hope it allows you to understand how we can actually build a scenario and test the scenarios in this case. Finally, one last comment, last slide, about ICT risk. This is actually not written in the regulation. I would argue it's a claim of mine, but it should be fairly obvious, and I would love to know what are your thoughts about this. So if you think about so we said that one of the requirements of operation of DORA regarding ICT risk is also about the organizational aspects, meaning that historically for financial institutions, we had the operational risk team that reported to the board of directors, and the ICT risk team reported to the operational risk. So from the organizational perspective, the before DORA scenario is something like this, in which the control function is the operational risk, the official one, and the ICT risk is just embedded into the operational risk function. Now, from a reporting perspective, what happens is that historically, the operational risk team reported the operational risk using a quantitative approach, using numbers, money, okay, financial terms. Whereas the ICT risk, the majority organization reported on ICT risk using a qualitative approach, which was perfectly feasible because the main goal in this case was to prioritize the spending on the control spending, okay, the budget on control spending. So that was okay. However, after DORA, what happens? This is the new situation. The ICT risk function has been elevated at the same level as operational risk. So that's a new control function with a new organization, a new budget, new people. They reported directly to the board of directors. So now imagine a scenario like this. We are in a board meeting and the board of directors ask to the operational risk function, hey, what's your risk exposure? Hey, it's $10 million exposure. Okay, that's fine because they are used to be report on risk using financial terms. And you, ICT risk, what's your risk exposure? Oh, it's medium high. What? What do you mean? So as you can see, it's actually a very simple situation. But in my view, we can expect that the situation, all the organizations affected by DORA will actually need to reconsider their ICT risk assessment and risk analysis methodology in order to include also and to adopt a quantitative approach, just for reporting need and to align the reporting of ICT risk with a way that the board of directors issued operational risk, which means in financial terms. And this is just to let you know that in the Archer ecosystem, we also have the so-called Archer Insight use cases that also support this aspect. Okay, so that's all. I hope I gave you an interesting point of view. So back to the last polling question. So based on our current business environment, can you rank the implementation priority of the following areas to achieve DORA compliance? Number one is the top of priority. So yeah, thank you, Patrick, for starting the polling.
Yeah, so you want these in priority order, right? Luciano, which is most to least important for them?
Yeah, number one is the most important. So if for the people, the most important one is implementing operational resilience, they should rank one and the number three. So it's just number one. Number one is the top priority.
Okay. There we go. Here's some results.
Yeah, maybe the question is not straightforward as previous ones, and that's okay.
That's okay. I think they're responding now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, while they're responding, Elizabeth, yeah, great question. Archer does have some white papers that gets into all of this, and we'd be happy to share those. So I will put my email in the chat if anyone would like those, or let me just find everyone here. Yeah, just send me an email. I'm happy to send you whatever you want. We've got some details about our offerings, and then we've got a white paper we just did on DORA, a couple of ebooks, lots of materials on this, and so it looks like Luciano,
That's okay. That's okay.
why
Absolutely.
don't we
Okay.
go ahead and
Yeah.
people are still responding.
Yeah. Okay. So we can wrap up.
Yeah, we've got a minute left, so I'm gonna end that. Share the results. So I don't know if you want to screen grab that, Luciano. We can maybe get some analysis out to everybody afterwards. Might be interesting to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You got that?
I have not the final results actually. Don't know what's happening.
All right. I want to stop sharing. We are going to wrap up. So in the last about half a minute,
okay.
We've talked about the regulatory guidance. Luciano did a masterful job taking us through that. It's pretty complex. There's a lot to it, especially DORA, and we wanted to spend time on that because it's new and because it impacts all of the EU. So if you do business there or work and do business there, you really need to pay attention to that. But just some encouragement, you likely have the teams and the tools to get there, to do this. And Dukan asked a really good question that we didn't get a chance to get to, but he said, we have BCM, I'm sorry, Dukan, he or she, and I apologize, but we have BCM in place. Which next steps should we take in achieving operational resilience? And we've got some materials on that. I mentioned to Dukan to reach out to me, but if anyone else is interested as well, and Dukan's in the United States, I'm assuming because you have to comply with the Basel regulation or suggestions, let's call it at that point, but happy to help out with the transition. We've worked with many companies so far to transition from that business continuity recovery to operational resilience. And just the last thing, hopefully this came out too, this really is a strategic advantage for your organization. If you go down this path and building upon that foundation of integrated risk management is absolutely vital. And we can help you do that. We're working with a lot of companies to do this. So lots of good reasons to focus on building a resilient organization. And just finally, the last slide, we've got some resources in the chat, in the resources tab of the webinar here. Please grab those, reach out. We've got lots more, happy to help. And just thank you so much for spending your hour with us, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you.